Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of GreyB Talks. I am your host, Dhruva Sood. It's my absolute pleasure to bring you this very special episode. Today, we are talking about food tech and its convergence with patent strategy. It's going to be an exciting episode. I have three very special guests with me for this show today. Let me introduce them. First is Sheena Wang. Sheena is an attorney with Rothwell Fick DC office. She has a master's in biotech from Johns Hopkins. She has a bachelor's of science from University of Western Ontario, honors double major in genetics and cell biology. A background in both law and science, Sheena is super passionate about the food tech industry and the IP strategy surrounding this. She has authored several articles on the topic. Sheena, we are super excited to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to be on this episode. I'm very excited to be here.
Great. Our next guest today is Eugene Wang. Eugene is the co founder and CEO of Sophie's BioNutrients. It's a company with a focus on building 100% plant based and sustainable alternative protein for the food industry. He's been doing this for 14 plus years, a business strategy expert, inventor, and an enthusiast for innovative new technologies. Eugene, so glad you could join us for this discussion today.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be discussing all the wonderful topics that we're going to talk about today. Thank you.
Great. Finally, we have Shikhar. Shikhar is a senior vice president at GreyB with 15 plus years of experience working with top corporations on patent strategy. Shikhar now focuses completely on working closely with R&D teams and innovation experts globally. He solves their research-based challenges and helps them with data-backed decision making. Hi, Shikhar. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting Dhruv. Good to be here and look forward to the healthy conversation.
Great. So let's dive right into it. Welcome, Sheena, Eugene, and Shikhar. My first question is to you, Eugene. Eugene, like I said, 14 years innovating in plant protein technology. Walk us through how did this all start? Did you think back then that this tech is going to blow up into such a big thing today?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I started the whole journey because my family being in Taiwan, you know, um, being four generations Buddhism, and because of that religious belief, we've been three generations making vegetarian food, and that's why when I found out my daughter Sophie is allergic to shellfish, and that's how and why I started the whole journey as an entrepreneur to pursue the cure, not just for my daughter, but also for all the people who suffer from the same issue. Now, along the way, I found a bigger mission and bigger impact that I wanna um, to make it happen to myself and also to the whole world. And it's a very interesting and exciting journey in the sense that in the beginning I was just playing with the foods that my family was making, and then for my daughter, then I thought, hey, I don't see any seafood alternative in the market around the world today. Why not just make it a business and sell it? And then along the way, I found out, well, I want to make a better and perfect seafood, and so that's how and why I was researching into microalgae, and then I found out there's even a more sustainable way that we can make protein. And then along the way, you can imagine the whole world starting. Back when I first started the business, it was around the time when Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat also started. That was a very early days for the plant-based foods movement. And then now we're looking back, plant-based foods is ubiquitous. It's almost everywhere. There are a lot more people call themselves flexitarians. It's amazing to see how plant-based foods got to what it is today. Now, there's still a long way to go, but then just the phenomenon itself is amazing. And I believe with the global warming, we see all the crazy weather, all the crazy disasters happening around the world. I think people will look back and say, I want to reflect what I'm eating on my plate today and change the pattern of my diet and make a better world for the future. There's a lot we can talk about. I'm gonna stop right there and let the rest of the panelists to discuss this wonderful, wonderful topic.
Great. Thank you for sharing that story, Eugene. It's very interesting, and I'm new to the word flexitarian, but it's a very interesting term. Thank you for sharing that too. Uh, Sheena, my next question is to you. Tell us a little bit about your practice. You've been serving clients in this domain for a long time now. What do you think should companies focus on as a strategy when they're building their IP portfolio in this tech? And a little bit about your practice.
Sure, yeah. So I think the most important thing for food technologies to consider is what kind of intellectual property options are open to them, and then how best to protect their critical assets using each type of intellectual property. So, for example, there's four main types of intellectual property. There's patents, trademarks, trade secrets, and copyright. And a company can protect its proprietary technology using patents, which grant exclusive rights to an invention for 20 years in the US. Or alternatively, a company can protect its inventions using trade secrets, which can also include any type of confidential information. And then one thing to consider here is that a patent term is limited to 20 years, at least in the US. And a trade secret gives you protection for as long as you can keep it a secret. And then a company can also protect its brand using trademarks, which are used to protect words, phrases, designs, and that identify a company's product. And then a company can also use copyright protection to protect its creative expression. So, for example, commercials, expressive text of a recipe or menu, but not the recipe itself, photographs of food, and things like that. So on the flip side, I think it's also important for companies to understand the limitations of each intellectual property option. So I already mentioned that the patent versus trade secret example. Another example is that copyright only protects the creative expression of ideas. So the recipe itself, as a list of ingredients, can't be protected as a trade secret. Or sorry, can be protected as a trade secret, can't be protected as copyright. Um, so, for example, famously, Heinz ketchup recipe is a trade secret. Campari's herb and spice blend is also a trade secret, and Coca-Cola's formula is a trade secret as well. Also, companies should know that not all confidential information is automatically protected as a trade secret. Depending on each country's trade secret laws, there are specific steps that a company needs to take to protect certain information for it to be considered a trade secret in a court of law. So it's very important for companies to consult legal professionals in the geographical area that they're interested in to help develop the company's trade secret IP strategy. And then another important consideration for companies is the geographical market they want to target, because intellectual property laws are different in each country. And so this might be affected by where they started their company, which countries have friendly regulations for their product, and who their demographic is. So for the second part of your question, so this might affect, for example, if a company wants to keep their inventions as a trade secret or file a patent. So, for example, many investors value investing in a company with a large IP portfolio, and this is especially important for companies who are still in their R&D stage and may not have a commercial product on the market yet. And in that case, intellectual property is a tangible asset that an investor can see and assess the value of. And so this may affect a company's IP strategy, because, for example, patents, trademarks, and copyrights is a tangible asset. You can produce your registration or patent, and so, for example, a granted patent covering a specific technology or a registered trademark covering their logo. But in contrast, it's more difficult to quantify and to value trade secrets, for example. So, in conclusion, there's a lot for companies to consider when planning their IP strategy. I definitely recommend consulting an IP attorney when making these critical decisions. And yeah, so this is something that I have worked on, is just client counseling and helping companies develop their IP strategy.
Great, very interesting, and thank you for sharing about the different types of IP that people need to focus on. Traditionally, I think food tech is has been inclined, like you mentioned, Coke and the Heinz ketchup. They're all been inclined towards trade secrets, and so now, do you see a shift in balance, or is this equally balanced right now? Is there more focus towards patent strategy versus just relying on trade secrets? What is the balance like?
Great, yeah. So that's a really interesting question. So the food and beverage industry historically has always used trade secrets to protect its proprietary assets. Um, but the technology field generally uses patents to protect its assets. So food tech is kind of in in between these two industries. And so one thing to consider is kind of the difference between what you can protect with trade secrets and what you can protect with patents, and the pros and cons of both. So, for example, patents have a time limit. So, in 20 years in the US, for example, after you filed your patent, your technology would be open to the public. Basically, anyone could use it, while trade secrets can be protected indefinitely. But on the other hand, proprietary assets would no longer be eligible for trade secret protection if a competitor is able to independently develop or reverse engineer a company's secret information. And in that case, the trade secret is not protected against, at least against that competitor. So one thing for companies to consider is, the advantages and potential pitfalls of protecting a proprietary asset as a trade secret instead of a patent. And this is kind of shown in a recent lawsuit where two food tech startups developing fungi-based meat alternatives were embroiled in a lawsuit regarding theft of trade secrets and then inventorship of a patent. So what happened was one company, the Better Meat Co., has a patent on this tech, and then the other company, Meaty Foods, argued that the patent that Better Meat Co. has was their trade secret and confidential information, and then that its scientists should be listed as the inventors of that patent. So this was a litigation that recently came to a conclusion, where the court actually settled, or the court actually sided with the Better Meat Co. and their patent, and it looks like they have the parties are not planning to proceed with appealing that decision.
Thank you for sharing, Sheena. I'll quickly go to Shikhar. Shikhar, you've had experience of working so closely with innovation teams in this industry also. What are some of the questions that these companies come to you with to figure out based on data, and what's happening on your side when you interact with all of the leaders in this domain?
Let me see. There are numerous questions that are coming up, starting with the upcoming trends, where companies should invest, what type of problems are picking up, how consumers are responding to it. But my favorite one is when companies are relating it with sustainability theme. So at the heart of every company, what I found out, when they are working towards plant proteins or food related innovations, the key aspect is they are considering reduction in carbon footprint. And most of the time when they work with us, along with everything else that they are asking, the key thing is how it is going to impact, one, the consumer, and second, the environment. Now in this particular case, uh, everyone is considering that the food that we are eating, it's not just the essential nutrients that they are providing, but how healthy it is for the environment as a whole. We are moving towards an area where we are going to be 10 billion population soon. Now, the point of question here is the current practices that we have, by following those, can we sustain in the future or not? And this is a big concern. Now, while we address these, another key aspect that I found companies asking is, are there some collaboration opportunities? Now, this is pretty interesting because all the companies, they are now coming on the same page that whatever they are doing in house, that is good, but setting up an open innovation department, or even if they don't have an open innovation department, looking at startups, looking at every single thing that can be called as innovation, every solution that is out there, it is important for them to understand those solutions and integrate somehow those into their own business. And this is something that I enjoy doing as well.
Great, great. Thank you, Shikhar, for sharing that. And yes, I mean, sustainability does come at the heart of, when we talk about all of these food technology that is picking up. So great, great. Thank you for sharing. And for my next question, I would like to get thoughts from all three of you. Uh, we talked about this tech is expanding globally. I want to understand what are the key challenges companies are facing when they are protecting their IP in this tech. What are some of the other things that are happening in the industry where patenting itself, is it becoming difficult because of certain reasons? Is there convergence in technology that is happening? Love to hear your thoughts on all of this. And for this, maybe first I can go to Sheena. Uh,
So I think a case study is actually a good way to answer this question. So many people have heard of Impossible Foods, which Eugene also mentioned earlier. And they're an example of a food tech company with a big global patent portfolio. And they make plant-based meat products such as their Impossible Burger. And they filed their first ever food tech patent infringement lawsuit in the U.S. In March 2022 against another US-based food tech company called Motif Foodworks. So they recently settled their district court lawsuit and their parallel appeal of the Patent Trial and Appeal Board decision, which invalidated one of Impossible Foods' key patents, but declined to review Motif Foodworks' challenges to 6 of the other patents owned by Impossible Foods. And then bringing in the global aspect of it, Impossible Foods was also facing an opposition in the European Patent Office, the EPO. And then, so one thing for companies to consider who operate globally in the space is that they might face challenges in multiple jurisdictions that may have the same or different outcomes. So in Europe, the EPO initially revoked one of Impossible Foods' patents. Impossible Foods filed a notice of appeal, and it looks like they just entered in a decision in the appeal instead of going to oral arguments. So in that case, in the EPO, Impossible Foods in their appeal withdrew their main request, which was directed to their product, and was proceeding with the appeal with their auxiliary request 1, which is directed to a method of making their plant-based product or plant-based meat rather than on the product itself. So I think one thing for companies in the plant-based space, since it's also such a new area to consider, is that it's a good way to kind of cover your bases, I guess, is to, when you're strategizing on your IP strategy, especially globally, is to consider filing patents or at least claims directed to the product, directed to the method, anything that you have that is new and is patentable, consider adding that um, to your patent portfolio. And then I passing the question to Eugene. As a food tech company, what are your thoughts on developing your global IP strategy?
That's a tough question for anyone who are kind of venturing into the new territory. So this is a place where nobody knows what's going to happen, what's out there. So everybody is trying to do anything, everything to protect themselves. And what happened in the end is just like what's happening with Beyond Meat or Impossible Foods in this case is that they are trying to file a lot of patents with a lot of very broad claims. And these broad claims ended up stifling, if not stopping, a lot of the new innovations, a lot of the copycats in the point of view of Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods point of view. But then, to be honest, just like a lot of the other industry, there definitely is a fundamental technology being developed, and then a lot of the new technology will have to build up on top of that. Now, for the guys who develop the fundamental technologies, if they have a very broad claim that's protecting themselves and stopping from everyone trying to utilize or based their subsequent technology on top of that, then you're stifling a lot of the new technology. But then, since this is a place where there is no rule, no guidance, company just laid out a lot of broad claims to try to protect their interest. And that's bad. But you have to understand where they came from and why they did that. And so the solution going forward is to look at other industry and see if there's any cure, if there's any way that we can try to stop these unreasonable, ridiculous broad claim on the patent being filed and still open up a lot of opportunities for new innovations and stop a lot of these ridiculous lawsuits like what Sheena mentioned about Impossible Foods and Motive Footwork. In my opinion, that's just ridiculous because what's in discussion was the heme protein, which is Impossible Food was trying to use some kind of microorganism to develop a similar iron carried blood cells that can replace carry the flavor and the nutrients that's usually happen in the animal meat. And then Motive Footwork and saying that, oh, I got something else to develop the same thing. And then because Impossible Foods was the first one to develop it, they then tried to block everyone else, including the Motive Footwork, to do the same work. As you can see, like I said, this is going to be bad for the ongoing innovations. And how can we protect the original innovator to some extent while encouraging the follow-up subsequent innovations to develop is the key challenge that we have to consider in order to strategize for this patent IP world to thrive and new innovations can keep going on in the future.
Got it. Thank you, Eugene. I mean, it is an interesting situation that you just described about the first movers taking advantage, going for really really broad claims. I wonder if there is a natural way to challenge these patents in a way that it's just way too broad, or there are portions of your claim that are probably common knowledge, and then that you have to probably narrow them. But I hope Sheena and colleagues in the industry, the lawyer community comes up with these solutions, and there is a way to overcome this. With that, Shikhar, how about you? Any thoughts from your side about challenges that are probably that you are seeing in the industry?
Yeah, definitely. I'll talk about the challenges, and I'll say that I agree with Sheena and Eugene that there is a lot that's happening, and in the recent times we have seen that the patent filing activities have picked up in the food domain, specifically with the biotechnology companies jumping into it, with the role of alternate technologies like AI, sensors, prediction that's coming up, where we also see non-food companies coming into the area and filing more patents. Definitely, uh, it can be a stifling environment for the startups and the innovators that are coming up. But the way I see this ecosystem is, if we take inspiration from other areas. For example, we do have the real life examples where the type C is becoming a common standard. Companies are collaborating, they are using it. It has happened in video codecs, in communication standards, where companies made a pool, they allowed innovators to use the innovation, come up with new equipment, devices, whatever technology is required. If something like that can be done, I believe it is going to boost the innovation rather than restricting it in the beginning. Now, coming on to the type of challenges that I have witnessed. Now, pretty much of these are the technical challenges which I see companies are trying to solve. Uh, in the last, I'll say, 1 decade, the innovation towards alternate protein and plant protein, it has picked up a lot. And the key challenge that I see in the industry is the nutritional balance that is required, how the amino acid enrichment can be done while using the plant based materials. Uh, then there are different type of technological improvements that are coming up with respect to digestibility. And if we move away from all these, then there are consumer related challenges also. How consumers are going to perceive certain food types. Imagine if you are presenting a lab grown meat patty, and then you are asking people to eat that. Now, few years back when Google experimented, it was like a $1 million project to prepare one burger patty. But imagine now we are having it very common. But still, one question remains the same: how consumers perceive it. Are they ready to eat that, something that is grown in the lab, or they still see that it is not food? Probably it is a laboratory experiment that companies are offering them to eat. And this perception is a main challenge. Even when it comes to plant based ingredients, I see there is a lot of acceptance that is there. And as per one of the reports in 2021, the amount of sales for the plant-based food, it was growing at a rate of 3 times compared to the actual meat that is there. So this indicates that there is a demand that is increasing, but at the same time, the challenges remains quite similar. Whether it is a regulatory challenge, it is taste, texture, or profiling challenge, it is the consumer acceptance challenge. Without this, I believe there is there is going to be a problem where the industry will face a lot of difficulty when it comes to innovation and acceptance of the innovation. So the way here is, while innovators are coming up with these innovations, there is a lot of education required at a consumer side to accept these innovations and be open to these.
Great, Shikhar. I mean, very interesting topic, and this is something that I remember talking to an industry leader from the dairy industry, and the gentleman, also brought it up that what would happen if there was standardization happening in the dairy industry, happening in the food industry. How would that even look like? And I think that's an interesting topic. And even the other one that you mentioned about consumer behavior, there is a lot of acceptance. It is growing big, but then again, there is definitely a section that may not be as open right now. And what is the optics of presenting the final product back to the market. Uh, Interesting challenges. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you, Sheena and Eugene, also for your very interesting inputs. We're down to the final question, and this might feel a little off topic, but we are at the intersection of 2024, 2025. We cannot help but talk about AI. And just as a bonus question, I want to check with all three of you, how is AI affecting your industry, your day-to-day work today? For you directly using AI tools for your certain tasks, or uh, if there is AI based inventions, AI based inventors right now that are there in the industry. Any thoughts on AI and this tech? So we'll start off again with Sheena, Eugene, and then Shikhar. Sheena, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually in the process of writing an article about legal considerations of AI in the food tech space with some of my colleagues right now. So without spoiling too much of my article, I will say that there's several major food companies have filed AI-related patent applications already, and several food tech startups actually use AI as a central component of their product development. And also, kind of interestingly, so what Eugene and Shikhar was talking about in terms of regulation in food tech, that kind of applies in the AI area as well. Like, for example, really every emerging technology faces some uncertainty in the legal area, which is not really tailored for things that are happening in the future, but is sort of backward looking to address problems that regulators are seeing happen right now. As kind of an aside, actually, this is also happening kind of in the field of genetic editing in the food industry, where the European Commission has actually released a draft proposal to aimed at accelerating genetic editing research for food, because right now the EU regulates genetically edited organisms, so organisms edited with CRISPR, for example, the same way as they regulate GMOs. But they're looking to adapt their regulation so that they are treating genetically edited organisms differently from a regulatory perspective, because they are not produced the same way as genetically modified organisms, which take, like, for example, something from the bacterial genome and put it into a plant, as opposed to, for example, CRISPR, which will just edit the plant genome itself, which is viewed as a much safer kind of technology. And so going back to AI again, so there's no lawsuits in the food technology space right now over AI tech, but I think food technology companies should keep an eye on the other lawsuits that are happening in the AI space, and then the ongoing discussions in the AI policy space. So, for example, on the patent side, there's a recent Federal Circuit decision that said that AI can't be listed as an inventor for a patent. But in February of last year, the US Patent and Trademark Office released a guidance saying that AI-assisted inventions are not completely unpatentable due to improper inventorship if one or more natural people significantly contributed to the invention. So another thing to consider is the copyright side of AI. There's actually a lot of ongoing copyright infringement lawsuits right now based on the data that is used to train AI. So, for example, if copyrighted books, news articles, and opinion articles written by human authors were used to train the data sets for AI, then the companies using that data might face copyright infringement lawsuits from other authors. So companies planning to use AI should think about the source of the material that they're using to train their AI, and then consider if they might be protected by copyright law, and then also definitely keep an eye on the policies around AI and around patenting of AI and copyright AI policies in the future.
Great, great. Thank you for sharing, Sheena. And Eugene, how about you? Your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think technology, especially AI, is going to play a very, very important role in the future in our foods, in our biotechnology development. Now, one example I can give you is protein folding and unfolding. Now, studying the protein structure used to be a human task that would requires like years, if not decades, of work to understand the intricacy of how the protein is structured. Now, with the AI, with a computer, you can do that within hours, if not minutes. And that's amazing because, I mean, think about it. Once you have all the data, once you have the AI trained, learn all these intricacy, you can then have the AI to design what we call a designer protein. Pretty much similar to what Sheena was mentioning about GMO. It's just that in the sense that this time around, it's not about gene editing, it's more about arranging the protein structure so that it became a super protein. Now, is that something the regulatory board, the regulatory people are going to be okay with? Is that something the people, the consumers, are not looking at it and say, this is another Frankenstein food that I'm not going to accept? You know, with all the global warming, with all the natural disaster we're seeing in the world today, I cannot emphasize more enough that the natural way, the traditional way of growing foods or eating foods is just not going to be sustainable. More and more, we have to rely on these technologies so that the way we grow foods and even the way we're digesting the foods can be a lot more efficient so that our footprint on this planet can be minimized and reduced. But in order to do that, these technologies have to be developed. And once the technology is developed, you got to have these ways to protect the IPs. And so, how do you change the consumer perceptions with all these technologies being laying on top of the food that they are eating, while not looking at it as a Frankenstein product? You know, it's like what I always tell my friends, you're okay with the phone that you have coming with a lot of patents. You're okay with the TV sets that you're looking at coming with a lot of patents. Even your house is protecting with a lot of patents. But then you like your food to be organic. You like your foods to be natural. And that's just very contradictory to the future that we envision. If we want to still support 8 billion or even 10 billion of population on this planet Earth and still grow foods and digest foods efficiently enough that we can minimize the footprint, all these technology has to be developed, has to be protected. And how can we communicate that message, like Shika said, to the consumers efficiently that they don't freak out and they don't see it as a Frankenstein food and still are willing to accept it? That's the main challenge. But from what I see it into the future, this is a key task that we can achieve with the AI and also the challenge that we have to address once we're able to do these things with tools that we have in our hands.
Got it. Thanks, Eugene. And I I completely agree with you. It's an interesting problem to solve. The optics of Frankenstein food. I think for food, mostly people have always had a bent towards the health benefits it brings, and if there is a way to show that the plant protein food, the lab grown food has benefits, rather than just showing that it does not have any bad effects, rather showing the benefits of it, might, I mean, it would motivate me to try it out. So but then I can eat almost anything. So thank you for sharing that, Eugene. Shikhar, I'll come quickly to you. What are your thoughts on AI in this tech?
I see it as a positive rising star for the future. The reason is I have a. I'll take it with an example. Imagine if someone asks me that uh, how would you like your chocolates or cakes to be? My answer will be, can you cut out the sugar, carbs, and give me the tasty and equally delicious cakes and chocolates, but no harm? So if I have to do that, I see AI as one of the tools to achieve it. And in in my work, I have seen various technologies being developed to do the same, where the computational analysis can be done on the food to study the nutritional aspect, taste, and texture, and then suggest how that can be prepared without the sugar or carbs. You can eliminate certain aspects, and still AI can help you to achieve some benefits with alternate ingredients. Now, there are numerous other benefits also, like Eugene indicated. The AI can be used for computational analysis of proteins. It can be done very fast. In a similar way, if I see the whole supply chain starting from crops to the food that is coming on our plate, there are numerous uses of AI that have come up in the recent time. For example, AI has been used for data processing and analysis, where the biological data sets and for genomics and genetics, those can be studied. The future trends can be predicted for the crops. Climate resilient crops can be developed. Imagine you have crops that can withstand a lot of heat or rain, and still it is going to be better. Imagine if you have a tool to modify the wheat to have less carbs but more of protein. All this can be possible because at a human level, whatever we were doing, AI can enhance it to more than 100 times also. And there are such type of interesting things where I also noticed that there is a startup that has come up with uh, the plant-based milk that people can customize at home. Imagine you want a flat latte, and you don't want to use a packaged milk, and the startup offers you a device with the AI algorithm. You just add the ingredients, pick the choices that you have, and you are ready with the plant-based milk of your choice. So, while we are talking about all the benefits and the interesting future with AI, I do resonate with the downsides, which we just discussed on the patent side, how it is going to look like. Will it allow the industrialization of such technologies, or there are going to be few players who are going to just own everything and restrict everyone? This is something where we need to wait and watch how this area develops, and what are the opportunities that we are going to see, and plus what are the benefits that consumers are going to get at the end.
Great, super interesting, Shikhar. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I think we've had some really interesting inputs today during our discussion. Right from Eugene's story of behind Sophie's BioNutrients, Sheena sharing about the IP strategy of balancing out between patents, copyrights, trade secrets, trademarks, protect all different jurisdictions. We talked about challenges. Standardization, is that something that could happen in food tech? How would consumers accept lab grown food? Litigations happening in multi jurisdiction, how do you work around that? uh, Eugene mentioned about super broad claims being accepted, and that bringing out a completely new challenge in the filing side of new innovations. We talked about AI. I think Sheena mentioned a very interesting point about people being sued because the data behind an AI trained algorithm is a copyright of someone else, and if you're earning out of it, it's trained on someone else's data altogether. So some very interesting points, some very new things that I definitely learned from all three of you. So thank you very much. This was really great, very informative. Uh, I'm going to look into a lot of these things that were very new to me for today. But uh, thank you all once again. I look forward to hosting you all again on another episode of GreyB Talks. And until next time, thank you very much and goodbye.